Do you ever wake in the night, gripped by the ache of someone gone, only to find you've lost more than them? You've lost yourself. The pain of their absence is a wound, but the deeper cut is the hollow where your own soul once stood. You walk through life now, a shadow of who you were, carrying their memory like a chain, believing this grief is your identity. You call it love, or perhaps just loss, but it is a theft, a betrayal of your true self. Buried beneath the weight of their departure, you feel it in the silence of their absence, when your heart aches not just for them, but for the you who vanished with them. You think this is your fate, a life defined by what was taken, but I see deeper. I see a soul, vibrant and restless, yearning to reclaim itself from the ruins of loss. The regret you carry is not theirs. It is the fear that you'll never find yourself again. You sense it when you pause, when memories sting sharper than they should, when you wonder who you are without them. These are signs your soul is sending, urging you to rediscover your truth in the aftermath. You may think you're alone in this, but this pattern has been repeated for centuries. Let's begin. The first sign your soul sends is the weight of the persona, the mask you've crafted to face the world after their loss. You've shaped it to hide your disorientation, to show strength, to be the role others expect, stoic mourner, loyal survivor, believing it is you. But it is a cage, stifling your true self, distancing you from the soul you've lost. You call it coping, or perhaps just necessity, but it is a shadow, a barrier to the authenticity your soul craves. The ego clings to this persona, fearing its loss would expose your fragility, but your soul yearns to be known again. You feel it when you smile to reassure others, yet feel unseen, or when you hide your confusion to avoid pity. You think, this is just who I am now, someone who carries on. But I would say, as I wrote in Ion, the shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. Your persona is not your soul. It is a sign it's crying out to be rediscovered, a barrier to your true self. Picture the man who nods politely at condolences, his laughter hollow, his heart adrift. He calls himself resilient, a pillar, but his persona, forged in the wake of loss, perhaps a partner's passing, where he learned to conceal his pain to protect others, smothers his soul trapped by the collective unconscious archetype of the mourner, whose mask breeds isolation until it's shed. Your persona feels heavier now because it is not yours. It's a sign your soul is yearning to reclaim itself. Your body knows this. That tightness in your chest when you play your role, that quiet ache when you long to be seen. This is your somatic intelligence, signaling that your mask is not your truth, but a barrier to your soul's rediscovery. Why does this weight feel so crushing? Because the world demands your composure, calling you weak when you falter. But what if their expectations are not about you? What if they too wear masks, unable to see the self you could become? As I wrote, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Your persona is not your strength. It is a call to reclaim your identity. The ache is deep because it feels like duty, but it is also a doorway. You are not here to perform for others. You are here to find yourself again. And that begins with shedding the mask that hides your soul. The second sign your soul sends is the projection of your shadow, casting your unexpressed grief, anger, or guilt onto others, blaming them for the emptiness their loss has left. You see flaws in those around you, their distance, their insensitivity, and feel justified in your resentment. But it is a mirage. You call it clarity, or perhaps just pain. But it is your shadow, a fragment of your true self you've disowned since their departure, pulling you further from yourself. The ego projects to avoid this darkness, but your soul yearns, craves for wholeness. You feel it when you resent others' attempts to comfort, or when you judge their lives to mask your own disorientation. You think, this is just who I am now, someone who's hurt. But I would say, as I wrote in The Undiscovered Self, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Your projections are not your insight. They are a sign your soul is yearning to be found, a barrier to its truth. Imagine the woman who scorns her friend's concern, her heart tight with blame. She calls herself wounded, a survivor, but her projections stem from her shadow. A grief unvoiced, perhaps from a sibling's death, where she learned to hide her pain to avoid burdening others, keeping her from her true self. Her soul lost in the collective unconscious archetype of the betrayed, whose blame isolates her until the shadow is faced. Your projections are a cry from your soul, a sign that your true self is yearning to reclaim what you've cast aside. Your body knows this, that heat in your chest when you judge, that quiet ache when you feel alone. This is your somatic intelligence, signaling that your shadow is not your enemy, but a key to rediscovering your soul. Why does this resentment feel so sharp? Because the world mirrors your projections, calling you bitter when you lash out. But what if their reactions are not about you? Your shadow is not your flaw. It is a call to find yourself. The sting is raw because it feels like truth, but it is also a doorway. You are not here to live in blame. You are here to find yourself again. And that begins with embracing the darkness you've projected. The third sign your soul sends is the weight of repressed wounds, scars from the loss itself, betrayal, abandonment, or silence that you've buried, believing they've faded. They linger in your unconscious, shaping your choices with their pain, keeping you from the self you were before. You call it healing, or perhaps just time, but it is a shadow, a wound that binds you to their absence. The ego represses these pains to maintain control, but your soul longs for release. You feel it when a memory halts your joy, or when you avoid new connections, fearing old hurts. You think, this is just who I am now, someone who's cautious. But I would say, as I wrote in Modern Man, In Search of a Soul, we cannot change anything unless we accept it. Your repressed wounds are not your strength. They are a sign your soul is yearning to be reclaimed, a barrier to its truth. Consider the man who wakes with a heavy heart, haunted by a loved one's departure. He calls himself stoic, a fighter, but his repressed wounds, a parent's sudden loss, perhaps, when he learned to bury his grief to seem strong, keep him from his true self, his soul bound by the collective unconscious archetype of the wounded, whose scars isolate him until they are faced. Your wounds are a cry from your soul, a sign that your true self is yearning to heal. Your body knows this. That tightness in your throat when a memory surfaces. That quiet ache when you push it down. This is your somatic intelligence, signaling that your wounds are not your burden, but a key to rediscovering your soul. Why do these scars feel so vivid? Because the world encourages repression, calling you fragile for feeling pain. But what if their dismissal is not about you? Your wounds are not your strength. They are a call to find yourself. The pain is deep because it lingers unseen, but it is also a doorway. You are not here to carry their loss forever. You are here to find yourself again. And that begins with facing the wounds that bind you. The fourth sign your soul sends is the flare of emotional triggers, sudden surges of sorrow, anger, or fear sparked by a word, a place, a memory tied to their absence. You feel ruled by these reactions as if they've claimed you, pulling you further from the self you once knew. You call it grief, or perhaps just sensitivity, but it is a signal, a sign your soul is yearning for freedom. The ego amplifies these triggers, tying you to their loss, while your soul craves release. You feel it when a familiar song cuts too deeply, or when a stranger's kindness unravels your composure. You think, this is just who I am now, someone who breaks. But I would say, as I wrote in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, the shadow is a tight passage, a narrow door, whose painful constriction no one is spared who goes down to the deep well. Your triggers are not your nature. They are a sign your soul is yearning to be found, a barrier to its truth. Picture the woman who weeps at a passing remark, her heart racing with a pain she doesn't understand. She calls herself fragile, a mourner. But her triggers stem from a childhood loss, perhaps a friend's departure, where she learned to suppress her sorrow, keeping her from her true self, her soul trapped by the collective unconscious archetype of the wounded heart, whose reactions mask deeper pain. Your triggers are a cry from your soul, a sign that your true self is yearning to break free. Your body knows this. That heat when a trigger flares, that quiet ache when you regret your reaction. This is your somatic intelligence, signaling that your triggers are not your truth, but a barrier to rediscovering your soul. Why do these flares feel so intense? Because the world amplifies your pain, calling you unstable when you falter. But what if their judgment is not about you? Your triggers are not your strength. They are a call to find yourself. The pain is sharp because it feels like loss, but it is also a doorway. You are not here to be ruled by their absence. You are here to find yourself again. And that begins with freeing yourself from the triggers that bind you. You're beginning to feel the soul's quiet plea now, aren't you? That restless ache. The sense that their absence has taken not just them, but the core of who you were, leaving you adrift in a life that feels borrowed. You've worn the persona, projected your shadow, carried repressed wounds, and flinched at triggers, thinking these were your new self. But they are signs your soul is yearning to rediscover itself after their loss. You feel it when their memory cuts sharper than it should, when your heart aches for the you who vanished with them, when you wonder if you'll ever find yourself again. You thought this was grief's toll, a personal failing, but it is your true self, crying out to break free from the roles you've played to survive their departure. The pain you carry, the emptiness you bear, is not your soul. It is the echo of their absence, pulling you from your own truth. These signs are your unconscious's cry, urging you to reclaim your identity before it fades entirely. As I wrote, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Let's walk deeper, where these signs reveal the path to finding yourself again. The fifth sign your soul sends is the burden of inherited grief, sorrow woven into your being from generations past. Parents, ancestors, whose losses you carry, amplifying the pain of their departure and distancing you from your true self. You call it mourning, or perhaps just sensitivity, but it is a shadow, binding you to their grief, not your own truth. The ego clings to this sorrow, mistaking it for love, while your soul yearns to be free. You feel this when their absence feels like a family curse, Or when you avoid joy, fearing it betrays them. You think, this is just who I am now, someone who grieves deeply. But I would say, as I wrote in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, the shadow is a tight passage, a narrow door, whose painful constriction no one is spared who goes down to the deep well. Your inherited grief is not your nature. It is a sign your soul is yearning to be found, a barrier to its truth. Picture the woman who weeps at old photographs, her heart heavy with a sorrow she cannot place. She calls herself loyal, a keeper of memories. But her inherited grief, a parent's unspoken loss, perhaps, or a grandparent's tales of tragedy, chains her spirit, keeping her soul bound by the collective unconscious archetype of the lamenter, whose sorrow isolates her until ancestral grief is released. Your grief is a cry from your soul, a sign that your true self is yearning to reclaim itself. Your body knows this, that trembling when their memory surfaces, that quiet ache when you long for peace. This is your somatic intelligence, signaling that your sorrow is not your truth, but a barrier to rediscovering your soul. Why does this grief feel so vast? Because the world reinforces your mourning, calling you heartless when you seek joy. But what if their expectations are not about you? What if they, too, carry inherited grief, unable to see the self you could become? As I wrote, the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of its parents. Your inherited grief is not your strength. It is a call to find yourself. The weight is deep because it spans generations, but it is also a doorway. You are not here to live their sorrow. You are here to reclaim your soul, and that begins with releasing the grief that binds it. The sixth sign your soul sends is spiritual fatigue, a weariness that no solace can ease, a sense that their loss has drained your life's meaning, leaving you hollow. You call it heartbreak, or perhaps just exhaustion, but it is a void, a sign your soul is yearning to rediscover its purpose after their departure. The ego pushes you to cling to their memory, but your soul hungers for authenticity. You feel this when you achieve what others praise yet feel empty, or when you wake with a quiet dread, unsure of who you are. You think, this is just who I am now, someone who's lost their way. But I would say, as I wrote in The Undiscovered Self, the individual is increasingly deprived of the moral decision as to how he should live his own life. Your spiritual fatigue is not your essence. It is a sign your soul is awakening, a barrier to its truth. Imagine the man who sits alone, his accomplishments fading into insignificance since their passing. He calls himself dutiful, a survivor. But his spiritual fatigue, a life reshaped by their absence, perhaps a child's death, where he buried his own dreams to honor theirs, drains his soul, keeping it bound by the collective unconscious archetype of the wanderer, whose exhaustion isolates him until he seeks his true path. Your weariness is a plea from your soul, a sign that your true self is yearning for meaning. Your body knows this, that heaviness in your limbs when you force progress, that quiet ache when you long for purpose. This is your somatic intelligence, signaling that your exhaustion is not your fate, but a barrier to rediscovering your soul. Why does this fatigue feel so profound? Because the world demands your silence, calling you selfish when you seek meaning. But what if their dismissal is not about you? Your spiritual fatigue is not your strength. It is a call to find yourself. The emptiness is deep because it feels like loss, but it is also a doorway. You are not here to live drained. You are here to reclaim your soul, and that begins with seeking the purpose that calls it. The seventh sign your soul sends is the denial of your shadow, a refusal to face the anger, guilt, or shame their loss has stirred, believing these flaws diminish your love for them. You hide these truths, thinking they make you unworthy, but they are your shadow, and your soul yearns for wholeness. You call it loyalty, or perhaps just dignity, but it is a delusion, keeping you bound to a false self. The ego fears this shadow, but your soul craves its integration. You feel this when you conceal your resentment to appear noble, or when you avoid truths that expose your pain. You think, this is just who I am now, someone who honors them. But I would say, as I wrote in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, we cannot change anything unless we accept it. Your denial is not your devotion. It is a sign your soul is yearning to be found, a barrier to its truth. Consider the woman who smiles through her grief, never admitting her anger at their departure. She calls herself steadfast, a guardian of their memory. But her denial, a childhood lesson perhaps when her pain was shamed, keeps her from authenticity, her soul bound by the collective unconscious archetype of the martyr, whose facade isolates her until the shadow is faced. Your denial is a cry from your soul, a sign that your true self is yearning to be whole. Your body knows this, that tension when you hide your truth, that quiet ache when you feel inauthentic. This is your somatic intelligence, signaling that your denial is not your truth, but a barrier to rediscovering your soul. Why does this pretense feel so vital? Because the world rewards your sacrifice, calling you flawed when you falter. But what if their standards are not about you? Your shadow's denial is not your strength. It is a call to find yourself. The unease is deep because it feels like protection. But it is also a doorway. You are not here to live as a false ideal. You are here to reclaim your soul. And that begins with embracing the shadow that completes it. The eighth sign your soul sends is the fear of moving forward, a dread that living fully without them betrays their memory, keeping you from the self you could become. You cling to their absence, believing it honors them, but it is a shadow, anchoring you to their loss. The ego fears this forward step, while your soul yearns to grow. You feel this when you hesitate to embrace new joys, or when guilt clouds your dreams of a fuller life. You think, this is just who I am now, someone who stays faithful. But I would say, as I wrote in Man and His Symbols, the unconscious is not just evil by nature, it is also the source of the highest good. Your fear of moving forward is not your loyalty. It is a sign your soul is yearning to be found, a barrier to its truth. Picture the man who avoids new beginnings, his heart heavy with guilt for surviving. He calls himself devoted, a keeper of their legacy. But his fear, a childhood moment, perhaps, when change was punished, keeps him from his true calling, his soul bound by the collective unconscious archetype of the sentinel, whose vigilance isolates him until he steps forward. Your fear is a plea from your soul, a sign that your true self is yearning to live again. Your body knows this, that knot in your stomach when you consider change, that quiet ache when you dream of freedom. This is your somatic intelligence, signaling that your fear is not your truth, but a barrier to rediscovering your soul. Why does this dread feel so heavy? Because the world amplifies your guilt, calling you disloyal when you try. But what if their judgment is not about you? Your fear of moving forward is not your strength. It is a call to find yourself. The hesitation is deep because it feels like betrayal. But it is also a doorway. You are not here to live in their shadow. You are here to reclaim your soul. And that begins with embracing the life that awaits it. You're feeling the soul's quiet rebellion now, aren't you? That restless pulse beneath the grief. The sense that their absence has not only taken them, but also the core of who you were, leaving you to wander in a life that feels like someone else's. You've worn the persona, projected your shadow, carried repressed wounds, flinched at triggers, borne inherited grief, endured spiritual fatigue, denied your darkness, and feared moving forward, thinking these defined you now. But they are signs your soul is yearning to rediscover itself, crying out to reclaim the self lost in their departure. You feel it when their memory stirs an ache for the you who vanished, when your heart longs for a truth you've buried, when you fear you'll never find yourself again. You thought this was the price of loss, a permanent fracture, but it is your true self, yearning to break free from the roles you've played to survive their absence. The pain you carry, the emptiness you bear, is not your soul. It is the echo of their loss, pulling you from your own path. These signs are your unconscious's plea, urging you to reclaim your identity before it slips further away. As I wrote, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. Let's walk deeper, where these signs unveil the path to finding yourself again. The ninth sign your soul sends is the craving for their presence, a desperate need to feel them again, as if their return could restore the self you lost. You call it love, or perhaps just longing, but it is a chain, binding you to their absence, keeping you from your own truth. The ego clings to this craving, fearing that letting go would erase them, while your soul yearns to stand whole without them. You feel this when you revisit their belongings, seeking their essence, or when you falter in moments they once filled. You think, this is just who I am now, someone who misses them. But I would say, as I wrote in The Undiscovered Self, the individual is increasingly deprived of the moral decision as to how he should live his own life. Your craving is not your love. It is a sign your soul is yearning to be found, a barrier to its truth. Picture the man who lingers over old letters, his heart empty despite their words. He calls himself devoted, a keeper of their memory. But his craving, a childhood wound perhaps, where loss taught him to cling, keeps him from his true self, his soul bound by the collective unconscious archetype of the yearner, whose longing isolates him until he releases their hold. Your craving is a cry from your soul, a sign that your true self is yearning to reclaim itself. Your body knows this, that racing pulse when you seek their trace, that quiet ache when their absence persists. This is your somatic intelligence signaling that your craving is not your truth, but a barrier to rediscovering your soul. Why does this need feel so consuming? Because the world fuels your grief, calling you disloyal when you seek yourself. But what if their expectations are not about you? What if they, too, cling to loss, unable to see the self you could become? As I wrote, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Your craving is not your strength. It is a call to find yourself. The ache is deep because it feels like love, but it is also a doorway. You are not here to live for their ghost. You are here to reclaim your soul, and that begins with embracing the truth within you. The 10th sign your soul sends is the grip of false identity, a belief that you are now only the one who lost them, as if their absence defines your entire being. You call it grief, or perhaps just reality, but it is a cage, locking you into a self shaped by loss, not truth. The ego clings to this identity, fearing change would betray them, while your soul yearns to rediscover its essence. You feel this when you define yourself by their absence, or when you resist paths that could lead you back to yourself. You think, This is just who I am now, someone shaped by loss. But I would say, as I wrote in Psychology and Alchemy, the soul is a fire that burns invisibly, and its restlessness is a sign of transformation. Your false identity is not your truth. It is a sign your soul is yearning to be found, a barrier to its awakening. Imagine the woman who calls herself a widow, her life frozen since their passing. She calls herself faithful, a mourner. But her false identity, a childhood lesson perhaps, where loss became her role, keeps her from growth, her soul bound by the collective unconscious archetype of the bereaved, whose identity traps her until she breaks free. Your false identity is a cry from your soul, a sign that your true self is yearning to emerge. Your body knows this. That tension in your shoulders when you cling to this role, that quiet ache when you glimpse freedom. This is your somatic intelligence, signaling that your identity is not your truth, but a barrier to rediscovering your soul. Why does this role feel so solid? Because the world reinforces your grief, calling you ungrateful when you seek change. But what if their resistance is not about you? Your false identity is not your strength. It is a call to find yourself. The resistance is deep because it feels like loyalty, but it is also a doorway. You are not here to live as their shadow. You are here to reclaim your soul, and that begins with embracing the truth that you are more than your loss. The 11th sign your soul sends is dissociation from joy, a numbness that keeps you from feeling life's warmth, as if their absence has stolen your right to happiness. You call it mourning, or perhaps just survival, but it is a void, a sign your soul is yearning to rediscover its vitality. The ego numbs you to protect against pain, while your soul hungers for life. You feel this when you avoid laughter, fearing it dishonors them, or when moments of joy feel like betrayal. You think, this is just who I am now, someone who's lost joy. But I would say, as I wrote in the Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, the shadow is a tight passage, a narrow door, whose painful constriction no one is spared, who goes down to the deep well. Your dissociation is not your nature. It is a sign your soul is yearning to be found, a barrier to its truth. Consider the man who turns from celebration, his heart heavy with guilt for feeling alive. He calls himself respectful, a guardian of their memory. But his dissociation, a life reshaped by their loss, perhaps a friend's passing, where he learned to suppress joy, keeps him from his soul's light, bound by the collective unconscious archetype of the forlorn, whose numbness isolates him until he embraces life. Your numbness is a cry from your soul, a sign that your true self is yearning for joy. Your body knows this, that hollowness in your chest when you avoid happiness, that quiet ache when you glimpse it. This is your somatic intelligence, signaling that your dissociation is not your truth, but a barrier to rediscovering your soul. Why does this numbness feel so safe? Because the world encourages your grief, calling you frivolous when you smile. But what if their judgment is not about you? Your dissociation is not your strength. It is a call to find yourself. The emptiness is deep because it feels like duty, but it is also a doorway. You are not here to live without joy. You are here to reclaim your soul, and that begins with embracing the life that calls it. The 12th sign your soul sends is resistance to new connections, a guarding of your heart to avoid the pain of another loss, believing closeness would betray them or risk more hurt. You call it caution, or perhaps just loyalty, but it is a wall, isolating you from the self you could become. The ego fears new bonds, while your soul craves the intimacy of authenticity. You feel this when you push away kindness, or when you avoid relationships that could heal you. You think, "This is just who I am now, someone who stays alone." But I would say, as I wrote in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, we cannot change anything unless we accept it. Your resistance is not your loyalty. It is a sign your soul is yearning to be found, a barrier to its truth. Picture the woman who deflects new friendships, her words curt, her heart closed. She calls herself faithful, a keeper of their memory. But her resistance, a childhood moment perhaps, when loss taught her to fear love, keeps her from authentic bonds, her soul bound by the collective unconscious archetype of the recluse, whose walls isolate her until they fall. Your resistance is a cry from your soul, a sign that your true self is yearning to connect. Your body knows this, that tightness in your chest when you push others away, that quiet ache when you long for closeness. This is your somatic intelligence, signaling that your resistance is not your truth, but a barrier to rediscovering your soul. Why does this isolation feel so safe? Because the world fears vulnerability, calling you weak when you open up. But what if their rejection is not about you? Your resistance is not your strength. It is a call to find yourself. The fear is deep because it feels like protection, but it is also a doorway. You are not here to live in solitude. You are here to reclaim your soul, and that begins with embracing the connections that free it. You're standing at the edge of your soul's truth now, aren't you? The weight of their absence presses against your heart, not just for them, but for the self you lost when they left. A hollow ache whispering that you may never find yourself again. You've worn the persona, projected your shadow, carried repressed wounds, flinched at triggers, borne inherited grief, endured spiritual fatigue, denied your darkness, feared moving forward, craved their presence, clung to a false identity, drifted from joy, and resisted new connections, thinking these were your new essence. But they are signs your soul is yearning to rediscover itself, crying out to reclaim the truth buried beneath their loss. You feel it when their memory stirs a longing for the you who vanished, when your heart aches for a purpose you've forgotten, when you fear you'll carry this emptiness forever. You thought this was grief's verdict, a life sentenced to their shadow. But it is your true self, yearning to break free from the roles you've played to survive their departure. The pain you carry, the silence you bear, is not your soul. It is the echo of their absence, pulling you from your own path. These signs are your unconscious's plea, urging you to reclaim your identity before it fades entirely. As I wrote, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. Let's walk deeper, where these signs become the path to finding yourself again. If you don't look inward, something else will rise from within to force your awakening, and you won't like what it shows you. The collective unconscious is not a dormant pool. It is a living force, pulsing with archetypes that will not be ignored. Ignore your soul's signs, and the shadow will erupt, as despair, a crisis, or a shattering loss that strips away the illusions you've clung to since they left. I see it in the world today. Men and women lost in grief, clinging to their absence or a false self, only to be broken when the unconscious demands reckoning. The woman who lives for their memory will face a void no nostalgia can fill. The man who resists joy will find his soul haunted by emptiness. If you do not face your soul now, the shadow will rise, not as a guide, but as a storm. As I wrote in Ion, the shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. You stand at a crossroads. Heed your soul's cries, or let them haunt you in ways you cannot foresee. The weight of this moment is heavy, but it is also a warning, a call to awaken. You are not here to remain lost in their absence. You are here to rediscover your soul, and that begins with facing the signs that signal its rebirth. The first step inward is acceptance, not of their loss, but of the truth that you've lost yourself in its wake. You mistake your burdens, your triggers, your fatigue, your craving for their presence, for your identity, believing they define you now. But acceptance is a fire that purifies without burning, a willingness to embrace these signs as signals of your true self stirring beneath the grief. You've spent years fighting your pain, your guilt, your numbness, your dissociation, thinking it makes you less. But what if this pain is not your shame, but your guide, pointing to the shadows you must claim to find yourself? As I wrote in Modern Man, In Search of a Soul, we cannot change anything unless we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses. Acceptance is the alchemy of the psyche, turning the weight of your loss into the light of your soul's truth. Picture the man who pauses, accepting his endless longing for their return. He once called himself loyal, a keeper of their memory. But now, he sees his craving, born from a childhood where love was tied to holding on, perhaps by a parent's expectations, as a sign, not his essence, but a signal his soul is yearning to be found. His acceptance, once a terror, becomes a sanctuary, allowing his true self to emerge from their shadow. The collective unconscious holds this archetype, the alchemist who transforms pain into wisdom, but only through acceptance. Your burdens are not you. They are signs your soul is yearning to reclaim itself. Your body knows this, that softening in your chest when you accept your truth, that quiet ache when you resist. This is your somatic intelligence, signaling that acceptance is a doorway, not a surrender. The pain of acceptance is tender because it asks you to face your depths, but it is also a light that reveals. You are not here to live in denial. You are here to rediscover your soul, and that begins with embracing the acceptance that honors your true self. The second step inward is integration, the act of weaving your shadow into yourself. You mistake your signs, your projections, your guilt, your resistance to joy, for your identity, believing they are flaws to erase. But integration is not about banishing these shadows, but about listening to them, understanding their roots in their loss, and letting them guide you to your truth. You've spent years casting your shadows onto others, blaming them for your pain, avoiding joy to honor their memory. But what if they are mirrors, reflecting the parts of you you've lost? As I wrote in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, the shadow is a tight passage, a narrow door, whose painful constriction no one is spared who goes down to the deep well. Integration is the passage through this door, a journey where the weight of their absence becomes the soil for your soul's growth. Imagine the woman who feels her anger rise at a friend's happiness, no longer suppressing it. She once called herself kind, a mourner, but now she integrates her shadow, seeing her resentment as a wound from their loss, perhaps a sibling's passing, where she learned to bury her own needs, signaling her soul's yearning to be found. Her integration, once a shame, becomes a bridge, guiding her to wholeness. The collective unconscious holds this archetype, the healer, who mends their own soul to rediscover truth, but only through integration. Your shadows are not you. They are signs your soul is yearning for wholeness. Your body feels this, that warmth in your core when you face your darkness, that quiet ache when you hide. This is your somatic intelligence, signaling that integration is a path, not a punishment. The pain of integration is heavy because it asks you to confront your depths, but it is also a light that reveals. You are not here to banish your shadows. You are here to rediscover your soul, and that begins with weaving your truth into your true self. The third step inward is silence, not the silence of grief, but the silence that unveils. You mistake your noise, your racing thoughts, your craving for their presence, your endless mourning, for your identity, but they are shields your ego raises against your soul's truth. Silence is the space where your unconscious speaks, where your signs, your fatigue, your false identity, your dissociation find their voice. You've spent years filling the silence with memories, with guilt, with others' expectations, thinking they define you. But what if silence is where your soul lives, where the loss you've carried reveals its deeper truth? As I wrote in Psychology and Alchemy, the soul is a fire that burns invisibly, and its restlessness is a sign of transformation. Silence is the crucible where this fire burns, transforming your shadows into light. Consider the man who sits in stillness, no longer fleeing his spiritual fatigue. He once called himself steadfast, always remembering. But now he embraces silence, seeing it as a space to feel his loss of self. Born from a childhood where grief was suppressed, perhaps by a family's demands, his silence, once a void, becomes a sanctuary, revealing the truth of his soul's longing. The collective unconscious holds this archetype, the sage, who finds wisdom in stillness, but only through silence. Your noise is not you. It is a distraction from your awakening, a cycle you can still. Your body knows this, that calm in your chest when you pause, that quiet ache when you rush. This is your somatic intelligence, signaling that silence is a gift, not a threat. The pain of silence is heavy because it asks you to listen, but it is also a light that illuminates. You are not here to live in noise. You are here to rediscover your soul, and that begins with embracing the silence that speaks its truth. The fourth step inward is solitude, not as isolation, but as a birth. You mistake your loneliness for your identity, believing your fear of new connections or loss of joy marks you as broken. But solitude is a space where your true self grows, free from the ego's need to cling to their memory, where your signs, your triggers, your grief, your dissociation become your teachers. You've spent years fleeing solitude, seeking others to fill the void their absence left, thinking they define your worth. But what if solitude is where your soul breathes, where the loss you've carried reveals its falsity? As I wrote in The Undiscovered Self, the individual is increasingly deprived of the moral decision as to how he should live his own life. Solitude is the space where you reclaim that decision, where your signs guide your soul's awakening. Picture the woman who walks alone at dusk, no longer fearing her loneliness. She once called herself connected, always needed, but now she embraces solitude, seeing it as a space to face her resistance to joy. Born from a childhood where loss was her burden, perhaps by a distant family. Her solitude, once a prison, becomes a womb, birthing a self that needs no external light. The collective unconscious holds this archetype, the seer, who finds vision in solitude, but only through embracing it. Your loneliness is not you. It is a signal of your soul's awakening, a cycle you can transform. Your body feels this, that peace in your core when you embrace solitude, that quiet ache for connection. This is your somatic intelligence, signaling that solitude is a path, not a punishment. The pain of solitude is tender because it asks you to stand alone, but it is also a light that births authenticity. You are not here to fear solitude. You are here to rediscover your soul, and that begins with embracing the solitude that shapes your true self. You're beginning to glimpse your soul's light now, aren't you? The weight of their absence, the ache of losing not just them but yourself, presses against your heart, urging you to reclaim your truth before it slips away. You've worn the persona, projected your shadow, carried repressed wounds, flinched at triggers, borne inherited grief, endured spiritual fatigue, denied your guilt, feared moving forward, craved their presence, clung to a false identity, drifted from joy, resisted connection, and taken the steps of acceptance, integration, silence, and solitude. These are not mere scars of loss, but signs your soul is yearning to rediscover itself, crying out to find the self you lost when they left. You feel it when their memory stirs a longing for who you were, when your heart aches for a purpose you've buried, when you fear you'll carry this emptiness forever. You thought this was grief's final word, a life dimmed by their shadow. But it is your true self, breaking free from the roles you've played to survive their departure, demanding its own voice. This is not surrender, it's rebirth. Your soul is stirring, its fire burning away the illusions to reclaim your truth. As I wrote, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Let's walk further, where these signs guide you to rediscover your soul. You've walked through fire, and yet your soul isn't ashes. It's finally visible. The 17th step inward is clarity. Not the clarity of answers, but of seeing your true self beyond the fog of their loss. You mistake your signs, your craving for their shadow, your guilt, your dissociation, for your identity, believing they define you now. But clarity is a veil lifted, a moment when your unconscious reveals the truth within your pain. Your triggers, your grief, your loneliness are not your essence, but signals of your soul's awakening, urging you to reclaim your authenticity. You've spent years chasing their echo, through memories, others' comfort, your own sorrow, thinking it would restore you. But what if clarity comes from embracing these signs as a map to your own heart? As I wrote in Man and His Symbols, the unconscious is not just evil by nature, it is also the source of the highest good. Clarity is the light that emerges when you see your signs as a path, not a prison. Picture the man who sees his longing for their presence for what it is. He once called himself devoted, a keeper of their memory, but now he sees clearly. Not a cure for his craving, but a truth within. His need for them, his resistance to joy, his spiritual fatigue are not his essence, but signs his soul is yearning to be found, shaped by a childhood where loss was his burden, perhaps under a parent's grief. His clarity, once a distant hope, becomes a mirror, reflecting a self that shines without their shadow. The collective unconscious holds this archetype, the seer who sees truth within, but only through clarity. Your signs are not you. They are shadows fading in the light of your awakening. Your body knows this, that lightness in your chest when truth dawns, that quiet ache when you cling to illusion. This is your somatic intelligence, signaling that clarity is a gift, not a goal. The pain of clarity is tender because it asks you to release their hold, but it is also a light that reveals. You are not here to live in their absence. You are here to rediscover your soul. And that begins with embracing the clarity that unveils your true self. The 18th step inward is surrender, not as defeat, but as trust in the unconscious. You mistake your resistance for your identity, believing your need to cling to their memory, your triggers, your grief, your dissociation defines you. But surrender is a shadow's release, a willingness to let your true self emerge through the pain of their loss. You've spent years fighting these signs, thinking control would preserve them or protect you. But what if surrender is the true freedom, allowing your soul to flow through your silence, your solitude, your longing? As I wrote in Psychology and Alchemy, the soul is a fire that burns invisibly, and its restlessness is a sign of transformation. Surrender is the crucible where this fire transforms you, turning the weight of their absence into the gold of your soul's truth. Imagine the woman who lets go of her false identity as the mourner, trusting her heart to guide her. She once called herself loyal, a guardian of their legacy. But now, she surrenders, seeing her false identity, her fear of moving forward, her guardedness as signs of a soul yearning for authenticity, shaped by a childhood where loss was her role, perhaps by a family's expectations. Her surrender, once a terror, becomes a freedom, allowing her true self to rise. The collective unconscious holds this archetype, the mystic who trusts the unseen, but only through surrender. Your resistance is not you. It is a shadow dissolving in the light of your awakening. Your body feels this, that peace in your core when you let go, that quiet ache when you cling. This is your somatic intelligence, signaling that surrender is a path, not a loss. The pain of surrender is tender because it asks you to trust, but it is also a fire that refines. You are not here to battle their absence forever. You are here to rediscover your soul, and that begins with embracing the surrender that shapes your true self. This is not the end. It is the first time you are beginning consciously. The 19th step inward is transformation, not as a sudden rebirth, but as the quiet unfolding of your true self. You mistake your signs, your craving for their presence, your dissociation, your resistance for your identity, believing they bind you to their loss forever. But transformation is a shadow's integration, a process where your unconscious weaves your burdens, your guilt, your triggers, your solitude, into your wholeness. You've spent years fleeing these signs, thinking they mark you as broken. But what if they are the raw material of your becoming, shaped by acceptance, integration, and surrender? As I wrote in Symbols of Transformation, the greatest tragedy of the individual is that he thinks he is not enough. Transformation is the moment you see you are enough, not despite your loss, but because of the journey it sparked. Consider the man who feels his fear of moving forward fade, no longer defining him. He once called himself a mourner, a shadow of their loss. But now he sees his signs, his inherited grief, his false identity, his numbness, as signals of a soul awakening, born from a childhood where loss was his burden, perhaps by a critical family. His transformation, once a hope, becomes a reality, not a new self, but the true self he always was. The collective unconscious holds this archetype, the hero, who rises by embracing their truth, but only through transformation. Your burdens are not you. They are a story transformed by your awakening. Your body knows this. That fire in your core when you embrace your truth. That quiet ache when you resist. This is your somatic intelligence, signaling that transformation is a process, not a destination. The pain of transformation is tender because it asks you to change, but it is also a light that reveals. You are not here to remain in their shadow. You are here to rediscover your soul, and that begins with embracing the transformation that shapes your true self. Dear brothers and sisters, do not rush to heal. Rush to understand. For what you do not understand, you will repeat. The 20th step is not a step, but a departure, a moment where I leave you with your own soul. You've mistaken your signs, your masks, wounds, fears, triggers, grief, shadows, longing, numbness, resistance, solitude for your identity. But these are signals of your true self awakening, cries from the unconscious guiding you to wholeness. The unconscious is not your foe. It is your fire, your truth. As I wrote in The Undiscovered Self, the individual is increasingly deprived of the moral decision as to how he should live his own life. You are here to reclaim that decision, to live as your whole, authentic self. Picture yourself now, standing at the edge of your life, no longer bound by their absence. You once called yourself broken, but now you see your signs as a map, each ache a signal of your soul's awakening. Your journey is not over. It is just beginning, consciously, with a soul that knows its worth. The collective unconscious holds this archetype, the self, the center of your psyche, radiant with the integration of all you are. Your burdens are not you. They are a story you've transcended, a cycle you've broken. Your body feels this, that warmth in your chest when you choose your truth, that quiet strength when you stand firm. This is your somatic intelligence, signaling that you are whole, not because you are flawless, but because you are true. The pain of this journey was heavy, but it was also a birth. You are not here to live lost in their absence. You are here to shine as your true self, and that begins with understanding the signs that called your soul. Go now and live it.